Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ms. Linnea King, and I am Program Manager of Health Services with C.O.P.E. And we want to welcome you all to our in-person town hall, and we want to thank you for being here this afternoon. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our team, starting with our superstar, Dr. Jacinda Abdul-Mutakabbir, or as we call her, Dr. Jam. Yes, give a round of applause. And then we also have Mr. Robert Gordon, who is our outreach coordinator, and we are the C.O.P.E. Health Equity Collaborative.
Newly launching today. So this is our launch, so it's very exciting.
Yes, and then we also want to give a shout out to our C.O.P.E. Fearless Leader, Pastor Samuel Casey, for allowing us the space, as well as Sister Tamika Casey and Dr. Delroy Brooks, who is pastor of Juniper Street. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Jam to begin her presentation.
Hello, everyone. So I would be remiss if I did not talk about how big this is for me and how much of a full circle moment it is, because I did not come here expecting to see so many Greeks. So let me tell you all about my history really quick. So I went to Howard, HU. Okay, we don't have any other Howard folks, but I went to Howard for undergrad. So while at Howard, guess what? In spring of 2012, I pledged into Zeta Phi Beta, Sorority Incorporated, Alpha Chapter. And also, while at Howard, I was the president of the National Pan-Hellenic Council there that we had, which is the first one to exist. But it's an honor to see the SG Rose here, because the SG Rose, and happy centennial, ladies, but the SG Rose were so supportive and honestly were my favorite sister Greeks on the yard at that time. So it is so amazing to see everybody here, because it's so rare that you get to share this moment with who I feel family. This is family, right? So also, I'm a Zeta. My mom's a Zeta. My sister's a Zeta. And my mom's sister is a Zeta. So I come from a blue and white family. So this is very exciting for me. So my name is Dr. Jacinda Abdul-Mutakabbir, but I go by Dr. Jam, like peanut butter and jam. My husband's here. He gave me that wonderful nickname, so thank you to Raheem for that. So I'm going to talk to you all a bit about COVID-19, influenza, and monkeypox. So with you all, you have surveys, right? Yay. So we have a pre-survey and then we have a post-survey. The reason that we have these surveys is because we want the world to know the beautiful research that we're doing in San Bernardino. So just a little bit of history. We've been doing this work. So I've been working with Pastor Casey and Sister King and Rob for quite some time, since 2021 actually, and has been sustained work. But in this work, we've been able to write publications. So actually provide this information to everyone else so that they can use it. So in our first publication that was published in a top journal, in which Pastor Sam Casey is an author on that, because he's been so influential to our work. And we had 60 citations. So to date, with this manuscript that we have that talks about our vaccination efforts in San Bernardino and our vaccination efforts to increase vaccine uptake in Black communities, we have people all over the world that use this to validate community outreach for vaccine uptake. So that's why these surveys are so important, because we want to make sure that folks continue to know what it is that we're doing for Black and brown communities right here in San Bernardino, but also that we spread our message, right, and worldwide we can start seeing a lot of things like this. So you all should have received this consent form. You have 2 surveys, like I said, pre and post. Please only complete the pre-survey. So the pre-survey should be completed. Who hasn't completed the pre-survey yet? Don't touch the post. Just do the pre. Okay, so if you are finished with your pre-survey, could you hold it up for me? And I'm going to have our doctoral students, Mahogany and Anna, come grab it from you all. So our post-survey, you're going to complete when we finish the presentation. So we want to know, is there a change in knowledge and attitudes? Because once again, like we said, we have to be able to show the community that this is effective work that we're doing. So we want to be able to do that. So our ladies are going to go ahead and they're going to grab these surveys from you all. And you all should have received pens too if you do not have them. These are Mahogany's pens that she really enjoys. Please give Mahogany back her pen. Okay, and then after they finish collecting, we'll launch right into the presentation. All righty. So just a brief overview of the discussion. So we're going to talk about just what COVID-19 looks like right now in the United States. We're going to do a brief explanation of vaccines. We're going to talk briefly about the spike protein mutations. We're going to talk about the Pfizer vaccine in children and adults and Moderna, Novavax, all of that information. And then we're going to round out with talking about monkeypox and just a bit of info there. So the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that COVID was declared a pandemic, right, in March of 2020. I don't know about you all, but I still feel like I'm in March of 2020. Like it's just been a very, very long year. So COVID is still something that's running completely rampant. But in the 2 years, it's really wreaked havoc. So that means we've seen more than 600 million infections worldwide, right? So that is insane. And 100 million of those infections have been right here in the United States. And in the United States, we've seen about 1 million or a bit over that at this point, deaths due to COVID-19. But when we think about COVID-19 and its true impact, what we can say is that Black and brown communities have been the most impacted, meaning that have been disproportionately represented amongst deaths, disproportionately represented amongst hospitalizations, as well as infections. So this is what I mean by disproportionate, because I know we hear that word all the time, but it's hard to kind of concept what it is that means. So can anybody tell me the number that Black individuals represent in the United States? Did I hear 13? Yep, so 13.4%, perfect actually, A+ for you all. So 13.4% is the representation of Black individuals in the United States. 1.5% is the representation of Native Americans. 25% or so is the representation for Hispanic individuals. Can you all believe that 60% of hospitalizations for COVID-19 have been amongst these individuals? We talked about these low numbers, right, that everyone is represented here in the United States. So that's what I mean by disproportionate, meaning more hospitalizations than the actual percentage in the United States demographics. So that's how COVID-19 has come through our communities. But then when we also think about that, we have to think about, well, why is this something that happens? Because we think about systemic right and structural racism. So when we think about the things and the ways that we come and we are able to protect ourselves against COVID, well, one thing we have to be able to do is socially distance. But we know due to structural racism, we know due to segregation, housing segregation, redlining, especially here in California, there's impossible for us to have adequate access to housing. So it's impossible for us to socially distance. Therefore, there are going to be more infections amongst individuals that are Black and brown. So racism is the reason that we're seeing the disproportionate infections, but it is something that we're seeing. So how is it that we protect ourselves from this? Well, we have to start thinking about vaccinations or prevention. So the way that we can prevent ourselves from getting different viruses, different bacterial infections is by getting vaccinated. So we have different types of vaccines. I always love this part of the presentation. And if you all know Bishop Simmons, at this point, I think he's giving me antidotes to use in the presentation to talk about the vaccines. So we have live vaccines. So live vaccines mean it contains a very small piece of the virus, but not enough to make you extremely sick, but enough to where your body can say, you know what, I've seen this before, and then you have sustained, meaning you have protection for a very long time. So an example of this would be the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. Most of us do not remember getting this vaccine because you get it when you're a child, right? But we remember getting it to our kids. But how many of you all can say that you've had the measles or the mumps or rubella? Right, because vaccines work. But this is a lifetime vaccine because it's live, meaning that you got a small piece of that virus and you were able to protect yourself and mount that just sustained or prolonged protection. And then we have our inactivated vaccines. So our inactivated vaccines are quite similar to the live, but guess what? They're dead, they've been killed, they've gone through fire, they've gone through chemicals. But despite that, they still maintain just a small piece of integrity. So once again, if you were to see that actual virus in real life, you'd be protected. So an example of this would be our Tdap vaccine. We all got our tetanus shot. If you ain't get it, you better get it. Don't step on a nail. So we know that we do it, every 10 years, right? They say, okay, I got to go get this Tdap vaccine. So this is the difference between a live vaccine and an inactivated vaccine. So with the inactivated vaccines, you have to remind your body continually, I have, in fact, seen this virus before. Maybe you got to wake it up and jolt it so that it remembers that it's seen it before in the form of this vaccine. Live vaccines are sustained. It's prolonged. You don't have to do that. You get it one time, one and done. So now we know with COVID-19, we have our mRNA vaccines, right? We've never heard of these before, right? Never seen them before. No, I'm kidding. At this point, I think I talk about mRNA vaccines more than I talk about anything else. So we have our Pfizer vaccine, right? And we have our Moderna vaccine. Who all's gotten a Pfizer or Moderna vaccine before? I've gotten both at this point. So we know we have our mRNA vaccine. So in our bodies, we have mRNA, we have RNA, we have DNA. So while these sound very similar, they are very different, very independent. So when I talk about these, I always like to talk about a moon or a honeymoon. And honestly, I stole this from my husband, so thank him for that. But when you think about a moon and a honeymoon, they have that same base, right? The same base word. However, we know that if someone is going, on their honeymoon, unless you are Elon Musk, or, these other billionaires that go travel to space randomly, we know for a fact that you are not going to the moon on this honeymoon, right? So while they have that same base, they are very different, very independent. So when we think about mRNA, DNA, and RNA, let's think about it from that perspective. While they have those same bases, they have very independent functions in our bodies. So mRNA tells our body specific proteins to make to stay alive. So in the case of the mRNA vaccines and in COVID-19, the mRNA tells our bodies, hey, you need to make the spike protein, which we know, the S protein, right, is how you distinguish COVID-19. So it tells our bodies, make this spike protein. Once your body makes that spike protein, it says, oh, wait a minute, this isn't supposed to be here. So then you make what are called antibodies or protection against this spike protein. So that's how the mRNA vaccines work. So we have Pfizer and then Moderna. So should you see COVID in real life, you should be protected because you've indeedingly, seen it in this way. And now we have our adenovirus vector vaccines. Anybody heard of Johnson & Johnson? Anyone get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? Okay, we got one person in the back. So yeah, we have our Johnson & Johnson, then we have AstraZeneca, which is very similar to our Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So what these viral vector vaccines do is that they use a low-grade virus to go ahead and provide that mRNA to make that spike protein. So quite similar to the mRNA vaccines, but quite a bit different. So the way that low-grade virus works is it doesn't really cause any type of true infection in humans, but what it does do is it allows for our immune system to be receptive to that mRNA information to make that spike protein, and then to once again, if you see this spike protein, your body says, hey, this isn't supposed to be here. You make antibodies or protection. Should you see it in real life, you should be protected. So these are how these different vaccines work. So stay with me with this, and then we'll keep going and talking about how it looked in the clinical trials. But first, I want to talk about our spike protein mutations, because this is what we are continually hearing about, right? This is why we have to get the updated vaccines, all that information. So I talked about how when you get these vaccines, it tells your body to make that spike protein. When you make the spike protein, your body makes protection, so on and so forth. So I think the most extraordinary thing about our bodies is that, the extraordinary thing about viruses is that they are very smart. So they can tell when your body is starting to protect yourself against them. And they say, you know what, no, we came to party. We're trying to stay here, so we're going to find ways to evade this protection that you've created. So that's where you see this spike protein, but our bodies have now said, you know what? We know that this virus is going to try to change its clothes, and stay with me here. I know we're in church, so you all can pretend that we don't know Change Clothes by Jay-Z, but stay with me, right? Stay with me here. Our bodies say, you know what? I know this virus is going to try to change clothes to change the way it looks. So we also have to make sure we change our clothes too, right? Because we want to make sure we can keep up with these wardrobe changes. So we're running behind Beyonce at this point. So our bodies have our T cells, right? Our T cells are our body's first line of protection. So as soon as you get that vaccine, you immediately have these cells that come out. That's your first line of saying, you know what? This isn't supposed to be here. We need to protect our human. And then we have our antibodies that come. So those are our memory cells, or our B cells, that say, you know what? We know that we protected our human against this virus, but we got to remember that we protected our human against this virus. So when you look at this, though, you see that they're all different colors, right? So that's to accommodate for the wardrobe changes. So although we may lose one area of protection, as we can see in that other photograph, So we might have changed clothes, and maybe that boot went on too well, and we couldn't distinguish what that part of the spike protein was. But guess what? We have several other parts of protection that we have, so you don't lose that base protection that you may have had. It may have changed a little bit, but you don't lose it altogether. So that's why with the vaccines, we didn't start seeing, or we didn't have that need to get these updated or these booster doses until a bit later in the game, once we started seeing these different variants come out. So every variant is not created equal, right? So every variant does not change its clothes as quickly as the next one. So that's why we don't have to get updated boosters every time we may hear a new variant name. So I want to put this into perspective because I always get that question of, well, why do I have to keep getting these vaccine doses? I get that. But in all honesty, it's because we don't have enough folks that have been vaccinated against COVID-19. And because we don't have enough folks that have been vaccinated against COVID-19, it's very easy for COVID to go from person to person and to put on that change of clothes. So when you're doing this consistent clothes change, you have to remember, now you're losing this realm of protection. But what we do know is the more protection that we give you, the more vaccinations that we get you, the more protection that you can have. So it's kind of like we're running against the clock here, right? We're trying to make sure that we're protecting these people, but it's still so many people out there where COVID can change its clothes in. So it's like putting a Band-Aid over a oozing wound. So when we think about this and we think about these updated boosters, so when you got the initial 2 doses or that Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that meant that you had maybe like 100 cells of protection. Let's just use that as an arbitrary number. So you had about 100 cells of protection. Well, when the Delta strain came out, we remember, right? We remember Delta. It was a rapid change clothes. At this point, we're now Beyonce at Coachella. You know, we're going through rapid wardrobe changes. We're losing all of this types of protection. So let's say now we were at 50,000 cells of protection. So while you're still above that 25,000, that was like that threshold for you need to be above this to be safe. So we are above that 25,000, but we're still not at that 100,000 that we were originally at when we got those first 2 doses. So now we're thinking like, how do we make sure that people end up back at this 100,000? Well, what do? We give them more vaccination doses because we want to do whatever it is that we can to ensure that folks are ending up back at this 100,000. So if we get more folks to get vaccinated, then that looks a little bit different, but that's not where we are right now. So when we think about just the clinical trials, that's how we start distinguishing how is it that we were represented in these studies to use these vaccines, but not only how were we represented in these studies, did they account for Black communities? Did they account for Hispanic communities, Native American communities, I'm not going to say elderly, our seasoned folks? We want to make sure that those people that were really infected and really impacted by COVID-19 are accounted for here, right? That's our biggest thing. That's what we want to know. So when we look at these clinical trials, I will say that these were the most well-conducted clinical trials that I have read, especially with vaccines. So the only vaccine study that comes even close to these vaccination studies for COVID-19 is the HPV vaccine study. So they had about 30,000 individuals in this clinical trial for HPV. Can anybody do like a guesstimate of how long you think it took them to enroll that 30,000 people into that HPV study? 2 years? 3 years? What's the maximum? Just throw out a number. 6 months. It took them 10 years to enroll 30,000 individuals. And look at this in this Pfizer study. We have 37,000 here, right? It took them 10 years to enroll 30,000, but now we have 37,000 here. And guess how long it took them to enroll them into this study? Give it to me again. Let's pretend we ain't hear it. 6 months, right? It took them 6 months to enroll folks for this study. So that's what happens when you put it when something affects everyone globally. We all have the same level of concern, right? You can do a lot of things with money. So we have this number of participants, but I'm gonna take you all through this science lecture. So when we're thinking about how is it that you navigate through clinical trials, or how is it that you look through literature and all this stuff, well, these are what's called randomized controlled clinical trials. meaning that you have individuals that receive the vaccine, and then you have individuals that do not receive the vaccine. And then that's how you compare how well does the vaccine work versus receiving absolutely nothing. Because that's what you want to know. How well does the vaccine work versus if you weren't to get the vaccine? So when we had this study, they enrolled about an equal number, so about 19,000 folks that received the vaccine. We had about 19,000 folks that did not. But when we're starting to look at these categories, you want to make sure that you had an equal amount of Black individuals, Hispanic, Native American individuals that are represented amongst both groups, right? Because you have to do this stuff and you have to remove bias from it. Because we know about the Tuskegee experiment, right? So, I'm a Black woman from a Black family. I have relatives that lived through the Tuskegee experiment. I mean, a lot of folks have lived through that. It didn't end until the 1970s. So, I think they just celebrated maybe the 50 year of Tuskegee. So, because of that, they have to make sure that they remove bias when they're doing these types of studies, especially when you're using minoritized individuals in them because of that study. So, with this, we had about 9.3% individuals that were Black, about 28% that were Hispanic, 0.5% that were Native American. We had a decent amount of individuals that were seasoned, right? We don't say elderly. So we had a good representation. And that 9.3% may seem small, but what was the percent that we gave for the United States demographics? 13.4%. So it's quite representative. And can anybody tell me the number of Black individuals in California? About 8%. So this is quite representative, right? So when we think it's hard, right, you don't think 8% because all your friends are Black, but yeah, that's what it is. And then we think about just the number of COVID-19 cases. We see 39 in that group that was vaccinated versus 82 in that group that was not vaccinated. That was after the first dose. So how many doses of the mRNA vaccine did we get? Did we get 1 or 2? We get 2, right? And this is why. Because when they did this study and then they looked at after the second dose, right, they saw only 8 individuals that had COVID-19 versus 162 that had COVID-19 in that group that was not vaccinated. So that's why we get 2 doses, because you get the maximum amount of protection with these mRNA vaccines after the second dose. This is how they come to these realizations with these types of clinical trials. So the biggest thing, though, is that if you get vaccinated, can you still get COVID-19? Yeah. Who was vaccinated and got COVID? Right? So you can still get it, right? Because the purpose of vaccines is to make sure that you do not get a severe presentation of the disease. It's to introduce the virus to you so your body can make protection so that should you get it, you don't end up in the hospital, you don't end up dead. So what I really like to focus on is severe COVID-19 cases. So when we look at that, we had 10 cases total. And only one of them in that vaccine group, in that one case in that vaccination group, did not result in death. So that's amazing. So this meant that you were 19 to 20 times more likely to be protected should you be vaccinated against COVID-19. So that's important, right? That's a big deal. And then we think about just the adverse effects that individuals may have. Well, headache, injection site tenderness, low-grade fever. Who had these? I know I did. I get a low-grade fever every time. But one thing that I like to say is your body doesn't make protection without what we call collateral effects. I don't like to say damage, collateral effects. So the way that your body makes protection or antibodies is when it's at a higher temperature. So that's why you might get that low-grade fever. When you get that low-grade fever, though, you don't feel super great, right? No, you get muscle pain and all that stuff, and that's what you experience there. But I always tell folks, give us about 6 hours or so, and then take the Tylenol, because your body makes the maximum amount of protection at a higher temperature. So you want to make the maximum amount of protection. You can take Tylenol, but give it about 6 to 8 hours before you do. You can hang in there. We can do it. We pledged, right? You can do it. So then we think about COVID in individuals 12 to 15 years old. So when we think about kids and why it takes a while for data to come out for children, children are what we call our vulnerable communities, right? So we have to make sure that the vaccines work in adults before we use them in kids. So a bit after this adult study, in the Pfizer trial, they enrolled about 2,000 children, so between the ages of 12 to 15. They separated them once again quite equally, removed bias to ensure that there was an equal representation of folks to receive the vaccine versus those that did not. There were 16 cases of COVID-19, and it was all in the group that received the placebo. That meant that children ages 12 to 15 were about 100% protected, or it was 100% effective in this group. right? So we see that. So we did see myocarditis. That's called inflammation of the myocardium, which is a place in the heart. We did see that amongst children. But I do want to explain this. So myocarditis is something, or inflammation is something that can occur when your body is making protection or immunity, because your body is really trying to fight off this low-grade version of the virus that it sees. So inflammation can occur, but it resolves spontaneously. And in those cases of myocarditis, there were no severe cases. So those kids were able to go ahead and go about their lives afterwards. And when we think about 12 to 15, that's when kids are really forging their immune systems. So they're very active at that point. So that's why it is that we saw it more likely in that age group. But that should not keep folks from getting the vaccination, especially the first one. Should you get it? Should your child have the myocarditis? And symptoms of that could be the lethargy and things like that. Maybe some muscle pain. That's a little bit more than what they would have experienced before. Should your child experience that? And we saw more in boys than we did girls. Then wait an additional 2 weeks before you get the second dose if they haven't gotten the full series. So just wait an additional 2 weeks. So then when we think about the COVID-19 vaccine in even younger children, something that we want to think about is how it is that they find this dose. So they do what are called dose finding studies to find the appropriate dose for kids. Because, I mean, a kid that is 5 to 11 years old, do we think that they need to be taking the same dose of a vaccine as an adult? No, they don't need to, right? They don't need to do that. So what they did was they had 48 children in total. They separated them into 3 groups of 16. They had them receive 10 micrograms, or let's just keep 10 in our minds. No need to attach the scientific lettering to them. Don't worry about it. I'm not expecting that of you all. And then 20, we had a group that received 20 micrograms, and then a group that received 30 micrograms. So for your information, adults receive 30 micrograms. So when we are testing these doses in children, we have to make sure that they at least perform just as well as the adult dose. We can't give them anything that's not as good, but we try to make sure that we can give them the lowest possible dose to ensure that if they're having side effects and things like that, that it's the lowest amount of side effects as possible. Because what 5-year-old is going to say, Mom, take me back for that second dose after they have a bad trip with the first one? Come on, let's be serious about that. I didn't even want to go back, right? So when we think about that, when they tested the 10 microgram dose, they saw that it corresponded to exactly the same amount of protection that adults had at the 30. So they said, you know what? We can use 10, we get the same amount of protection, and we get less side effects. So let's use this for our kids. So now for our children that are 5 to 11 years old, you'll get them that 10 microgram dose. But that's how they find it. And I think that's very important to provide this information in this capacity, because as more vaccines come out and we see different dosings and so on and so forth, now you all know how that was derived. So it doesn't seem odd that the dosing is different. And then when we think about 5 months to 4 years old, it's that same idea of using smaller doses for younger children. Again, there was a similar dose-finding study, and what they saw is we could use an even smaller dose for kids this age. So now we go ahead and we use that smaller dose there. And even when we think about effectiveness, there were 10 cases of COVID-19 in kids that received this smaller dose, and we have to think about the fact that kids that are children are less likely to develop COVID-19. We're seeing more serious effects when they do develop it now, but they're less likely to get it. So not many people, not many children anyway, were amongst those that developed COVID. So now we have Moderna, and I won't spend a ton of time here because we talked about a lot with Pfizer, but with Moderna, it's a similar type of representation in terms of the number of total people enrolled. Remember, we say a randomized controlled trial, so equal distribution in both groups. We see that after that second dose, it was 11 cases in the group that received that vaccine versus 185 in the group that did not. So once again, we're seeing that high effectiveness, right, of receiving the 2 doses of that vaccine. That means that you were about 19 times more likely to be protected should you have received the Moderna vaccine. We know that the vaccine doesn't keep you from getting COVID, so when we think about severe cases, there were absolutely 0. So we are still more likely to be protected after being vaccinated. And we think about those reported adverse effects and stuff like that, the headaches, injection site tenderness, low-grade fever. And then for the 6 months to 11 years old, similar to Pfizer, Moderna also did a dose finding study. They used the dose that adults use, and then they tried to see, can we break that down for our children? They saw that we could not for 6 to 11 years old, so they get the same exact dose that we get as adults. But then when you go down to 6 months to 5 years old, you can go ahead and get half of that dose. Excuse me, half of that dose, which makes perfect sense, right? And then we have finally our Novavax vaccine. Anybody got the Novavax vaccine yet? Anybody heard of the Novavax vaccine yet? Okay, right. So this is our COVID-19 vaccine that is quite similar to just traditional vaccines. So instead of your body making the spike protein itself through the mRNA technology telling it to make the spike protein, this comes with the spike protein already embedded. So it's traditional to how our normal vaccines would be. So with this, and it's a newer vaccine, so a lot of folks had already received that primary series of the vaccinations, so not a lot of people have received it yet. But when we think about just the clinical trials, it was very similar to Pfizer and Moderna. And I did not say this about Moderna, but Moderna actually stopped their clinical trial because they wanted to enroll more Black patients to ensure that there was adequate representation and that their vaccine indeedly worked against COVID-19 for the Black community, which I think is very important. Yeah, I believe that Novavax did that as well. It's been a really big push to just in the scientific community, and it's a push that I make myself as a Black scientist to ensure that, one, we respect the ethics when we're enrolling minoritized representatives into these studies, and then two, that we ensure it's an adequate representation, because it's wrong to not have folks there and then not force the vaccine or medication, but to offer this medication and not know exactly how it's going to perform in the community. So one thing about these vaccine trials is it really made it so that now this is the standard. We are going to make sure that we are enrolling Black and brown participants adequately. So when we think about the number of COVID-19 cases, this is a 2-dose vaccine as well. We saw 77 cases total, and then once again, we're seeing more in that group that is unvaccinated. So we saw about 90.4% efficacy if you were to receive that vaccine. And like I said, with Pfizer and Moderna, you are once again about 19 to 20 times more likely to be protected should you receive that vaccination. When we think about severe cases of COVID-19, there were none in this group as well. So that's important, right? We want to make sure, are we seeing severe cases? Because we know that the vaccines do not keep us from getting COVID, but we want to make sure we're not dying or ending up in this place where we have to ask for a ventilator, because we know what the hospital system looks like for Black and brown folks, right? We don't want to have ourselves in that position where we have to hope and pray that, we look a little bit better than the patient that may not be Black and brown next to us. When we think about our most frequently reported adverse effects, quite similar to what we see with the vaccines, you're getting something foreign, so it's not already there, injected into you. So we would expect that pain, and then the headache, and then the fatigue, and muscle pain. So now we are at the place where we're thinking about that booster and then that third dose and then all that. So now the vaccines that are recommended for us to get, they are 2-dose vaccines, right? Because we know that you are having that maximum amount of protection when you receive that second dose of that vaccine. Because you got to continue to shake the immune system. It's stubborn, right? Like a 14-year-old. If any of you all are 14, I'm going to assume you're not stubborn. So, you got to remind your immune system that it's indeedly seen this vaccine before. So if you are someone that is immunocompromised, though, we need a little bit more help, right? So you need a third dose of that vaccine. So to be completely vaccinated, if you are someone that has a competent immune system, meaning that you don't have cancer, you don't have rheumatoid arthritis, you're not on any medications, and if you are somebody with a compromised immune system, you know who you are. If you don't have those, then 2 doses of a COVID-19 means that you are fully vaccinated. You have to get 2 doses at minimum of a COVID-19 vaccine to be fully vaccinated. So if you are someone that is immunocompromised, meaning that you have HIV, you're on steroids or prolonged steroid use, rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, so on and so forth, then that means that you get 3 doses of the vaccine, meaning that you get Pfizer dose 1, 3 weeks later you get Pfizer dose 2, 3 weeks later you get Pfizer dose 3. Then after that, that means that you are fully vaccinated. So it's different for those folks that are immunocompromised. And that's because right now we have a stubborn 15-year-old. You gotta shake the immune system. You have to remind it. If you're 15, I'm assuming you're not stubborn. But but you got to shake your immune system. You have to remind your immune system that you've indeedly seen this before. And then after that, now you get into those booster doses of the vaccine. So that's to remember I said you want to restore, you want to get back to those maximum amount of cells of protection. So previously we had the first booster, right? We had the second booster, but now we have what are called our bivalent boosters. Have we heard about those? We haven't heard about the bivalent boosters? Okay, this is fun, right? So the way that I like to explain this is the bivalent booster that means that it contains two. So we know that bivalent, that means it contains two. That's what that means. That denotes that it has the original COVID-19 strain. So remember when we were previously getting booster dose 1, booster dose 2? So that was of the original COVID-19 vaccine. So we kept that because now, we know that original COVID-19 strain is still going around. But now we heard of Omicron, right? So now that updated bivalent booster contains also the Omicron strains. So now you have the OG COVID-19 strain, and now you have the Omicron COVID-19 strain. So we call them BA4 and BA5 because remember, that's what we kept seeing around. So then Pfizer and Moderna said, you know what? We're going to go and we're going to place this with the original COVID-19 vaccine, and now we're going to have people boost with this vaccine. Because not only are you boosting with the original COVID-19 strain, but you're boosting with what we know is circulating now. So COVID can change its clothes, right? So the strains that we may see circulating are quite different than the strains that we saw in 2020. Now in 2022, COVID has on an entire new getup. So we have to make sure that people are maximally protected against that. So when you are offered that updated bivalent booster, that's what that means. It's protecting you against the original COVID-19 strain, and it's also protecting you against what's out here right now. So that's when you go get a booster dose of COVID, that's now what the booster is, this updated bivalent one. And they'll call the original COVID-19 vaccines monovalent, meaning it only contains one, just the original strain. So when we think about just what the dosing looks like anyway, so for Pfizer, you're going to get the same dosing throughout. For Moderna, you're going to start getting half the dose. Has anyone gone to go get a booster dose of the vaccine and they tell you that for Moderna, you have to call ahead and be put on a list to get the Moderna vaccine? That happened to anybody? Okay, it happened previously, but for Moderna, just to explain this, there are a lot of doses that come in that vaccine vial. Meaning for Pfizer, you get about 5 doses. For Moderna, you get about 22. So when you open that Moderna vial, you better have 22 people lined up ready to get this vaccine, right? Because we know it's a lot of countries that don't have access. So sometimes you may not be able to receive that vaccine. So what this means is now you can mix and match the vaccines. Anybody mixed and match the vaccines that you got? So you can do that. You can do it, and you can do it safely. Actually, I want to say, I think my husband did it, right? And so did Pastor Casey, because I mixed his. So, so with these vaccines, that means that you can safely get a different one. So if you've gotten Pfizer, you can safely go and do Pfizer, Moderna. So why can we do this? Because they did clinical trials, right? And they wanted to see would people have the same amount of protection if they did not get Pfizer, if they got Pfizer, Moderna, or vice versa. And actually, would you believe it? They had more protection when they mixed and matched the vaccines. Not significantly more, meaning that you would be in a different place if you were to get the same ones versus getting the same ones in a different one. That's not the case, but you'll be just as protected if you were to mix them. So you can do that if you would like to. Okay, so we've gone over that. But I do have this graphic here, and that's just to go ahead and just clearly explain when it is that you get these updated boosters and all that. So you start with, you have to get the original 2 doses. So you don't go and say, hey, I want the bivalent booster. It's called a booster for a reason, right? We say boosters remind your immune system. You have to get the original 2. So then once you get the original 2, then you can go ahead and you can get the updated booster. So if you are someone that has gotten, booster dose 1, booster dose 2, you can go at least 2 months after you receive your latest COVID-19 shot. So if you're someone that got the first booster with the original COVID-19 vaccine, and then you got the second booster with the original COVID-19 vaccine, then that means that 2 months after you got that very last shot, you can go ahead and get the updated bivalent booster. So wait 2 months. I can take questions now. Yes. Good question. So the question is it a time limit for a booster? Meaning that if you got your doses of the vaccine and if you didn't get the booster when recommended, so within this 2-month time frame, if you wait for a prolonged period of time, do you have to start over? Absolutely not. No, you never have to start over. So actually, like say that you got your first dose of the COVID-19 with the vaccine, and you waited to get your second dose of the vaccine for full vaccination, you can wait up to 6 months and get that second dose. But the booster doses have no time limit, because at the end of the day, the first 2 doses are the mandatory ones. Those are the most important, because you want to give your immune system just that power punch of being used to COVID-19. You still will get protection against that, maybe not as maximally as you would should you be boosted and your body is continually reminded about the virus, but you'll still be protected from those first 2. So the booster doses, you can get those honestly whenever you want. But the sooner that you get it, the more potential that you are protected. So that's the thing. But honestly, if you are a healthy person, I would even recommend waiting about 3 to 4 months. Just allow your body that time to forge that natural immunity and stuff from COVID, and then get that booster. So you can wait about 3 to 4 months. But if you are someone that is immunocompromised, so after you get those 3 to make that primary series, then you go ahead and as soon as you can, get that updated booster. Because remember what I told you, that updated bivalent booster contains the original COVID-19 strain, and it also contains the currently circulating Omicron strains. So Omicron is what you want to be protected from. We remember Omicron, right? Beginning of the year, it was terrible. And it's still terrible. Like, it's getting even worse. And they're projecting that this might be a worse COVID season than even last year was. I'm very nervous as everybody comes back from the holidays and everything. I'm very nervous about that. So if you are someone that's immunocompromised, get the booster. And I'll even share with you all a story about my mom. So my dad got the booster. My dad is really good on vaccines, which is very surprising to me. But my dad is very good with getting his vaccinations. He got his updated booster. He got his flu shot. He got them both at the same time. And my mom ended up getting COVID. Can I tell you that my dad did not develop COVID at all? Was because she got tested, and at this point, she had COVID probably for like 3 or 4 days. My dad did not get COVID, and it was because he had the updated booster. They told him that's what saved you. That's what saved you, because he had the updated booster. They were in the same room, everything. He did not get sick one time. So that's how powerful, this updated booster is. But then also when we're thinking about COVID, we have to think about the fact that we have long COVID, right? So 1 in 5 people have long COVID-19. Long COVID-19 has resulted in about 3,500 deaths thus far. So long COVID is something that I'm really thinking about. And even when I think about Black communities, that means that you have persistent COVID-19 symptoms, meaning that if you lost your sense of taste, you lost your sense of smell, all of that, this means that people are continuing to have these things. So 3 to 5 months, 6 months later, they're having to get on disability because they have long COVID. Can't get out of the bed, can't work. So vaccines can protect you against this. So that's also something to think about when we're thinking about vaccination, especially these updated boosters. So when we're thinking about our kids and getting them vaccinated, anybody heard of this multi-system inflammatory syndrome? This is something right now, it is running rampant for kids. And who do we think are the kids that are suffering from this the most? Black and brown kids, right? Because these kids are less likely to be able to socially distance. Parents are less likely to be able to take off of work should they develop COVID-19, so on and so forth. This can be inflammation of the heart, lungs, kidneys, brain, skin. So we want to think about this when we're thinking about vaccinating our children, getting our children the updated boosters, because it can be very detrimental. But even when we think about those kids that are suffering the most, 60% of cases have been in Black and brown kids. So let's keep this in the forefront of our mind, especially with RSV, which is the respiratory syncytial virus. So this is a virus we don't have immunizations for. Kids get it more often because they're just forming their immune systems. So the more that we expose kids to these different viruses, the harder it is for them to fight them off because they don't have the immune systems that we have at, 30, 40 years old. We've seen a ton of different things. We've been able to have protection against it. They don't have that. We don't have vaccines against RSV and all these different things. So God forbid they develop both of these respiratory viruses, right? Because that is what we are seeing right now. And then when we think about antivirals, anybody use Paxlovid? Anybody get COVID-19 and go use the Paxlovid? Anybody heard of Paxlovid? So, okay, we heard of it, okay. So what this is these are oral antivirals. So they are different than the vaccines. So you can be vaccinated against COVID-19 and then your body makes the spike protein. These antivirals, they work different, meaning that once you have COVID-19, they make it so that it cannot enter your other cells. So that means that it cannot get worse than what it already is. So if you are someone that has moderate COVID-19, so say that you go get tested, you get a rapid test, you get COVID-19, then you can qualify to get Paxlovid. So this is something that you all can consider. You can go to it's a federally qualified health center, so a FQHC. I don't know if you all have heard of SACS. Loma Linda it's called SACS Clinic. Okay, it's an FQHC, not too far from here. Or you can go to your local pharmacy, and then they can do a rapid test, and then should you test positive, the pharmacist can give you a prescription for Paxlovid right there. So it's called Test to Treat. You can get it, and it's free to get the Paxlovid. You do not have to pay for it. So it's to prevent the virus from getting worse. And I can also give you all another personal experience. My mom, when she had COVID, she got the Paxlovid, and would you believe it? We quarantined for about 4 or 5 days, and she was completely better, as though she had never been infected after that 5th day, and she used Paxlovid. So then when we think about just what do these vaccines provide us, they provide us this herd immunity. We've heard herd immunity? Yes. So when we think about when people are infected, the problem when people get the natural infection of COVID-19 is we don't know how long people are protected for. So people heard of people being infected with COVID and then getting COVID right again? Exactly, because COVID is that type of virus. You don't know how many antibodies or protection that you have. You can see it, and then 2 months later, you can have it again. So what we know with these vaccines, though, we know that we can measure the amount of protection that people have. We know exactly the number of antibodies, or at least a ballpark that you should have after you get vaccinated. So that's why we want for folks to get vaccinated, because then we know that for X amount of time, we have this maximum amount of protection. So let's make sure that we urge folks to do this, because guess what? In San Bernardino County, we still have 70% of Black individuals that have not received a single dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. 70%. 70%. And it's hard to believe, right? Because we see all these people, we do all this outreach, we do all this work, and it's like, oh my goodness, only 30% of Black people here in San Bernardino are vaccinated, even less in Riverside. Even less. So we have to make sure that we are providing this information, and I always say it's not my job to twist your arm, but I don't know, I'm twisting a little bit right now because I want to make sure that we are protected and when we think about our fellow man, because let's think about what COVID is going to look like 5 years from now. I talked about long COVID. These diseases, these chronic illnesses that pop up, who do we think are going to be most affected? Black and brown people, because guess what? Health equity is not a priority. We know that. So we have to do the best that we can to prevent these things from happening. So I'm going to briefly just talk through monkeypox. Monkeypox isn't the issue that it was when we saw it in the summer, but it's important for us to be prepared, right? I think that what did we do when we talked about when we pledged? I don't know. We had the 3 Ps, right? Or I don't know. What is it? Poor performance or something like that. Poor preparation promotes poor performance. This is something I definitely believe with infectious diseases. Poor preparation is poor performance. So we got to be prepared. So when we think about monkeypox was, and this now been renamed to Mpox, but monkeypox was not caused by a monkey, right? Surprisingly. No, it was caused by a virus outbreak, and then monkeys were there. So then they said, you know what? Monkeypox it is. So it is called it's a type of variola virus, but very similar to smallpox. That's why the drugs that we use to treat monkeypox or Mpox are the drugs that have been repurposed for treatment of smallpox. And smallpox is something that we rarely ever see. Only those folks that work in laboratories are those that are infected. But why do we rarely ever see smallpox? Because what? Vaccination. vaccinations, right? Vaccinations. So the first monkeypox case was in the 1970s, and it was in Africa. So that's the reason that we don't have these rapidly deployed treatments for mpox, because we don't think about global equity. Because we don't think that diseases can go from, and I think COVID, if that has taught us anything, a problem that you see overseas is inevitably going to be a problem here. That's just life. We travel, we go from place to place. So keep that in mind when you start seeing about these viruses. Let's be prepared for what it might look like over here. And so when we think about mpox symptoms, it can be a rash. So typically the rash is the first thing that you will see, and then after that rash, you have flu-like symptoms. So when you do have that the flu-like symptoms plus the rash, it can take about 1 to 4 days before all the full symptoms present themselves, and they usually last about 3 weeks. So that means that until the rash has crusted over, we all remember chicken pox when they say you got to wait for the pox to crust over before you go in front of people and around folks. That's how mpox is. You have to wait until those crust over. But the big thing about mpox, and that I think it's a better position that we're in when compared to COVID. So mpox is something that it takes very, very close confined spaces for it to go from person to person. So COVID is what we call a respiratory virus, or it's a droplet virus, meaning it's easy because, we talk and then I've watched droplets go from place to place as I'm speaking. Very happy no one is sitting right here. But, that's how COVID is. It's airborne. Mpox is not that. So you have to be in very close contact. That's why they talk about, with sexual activity. It's not an STD, but because it requires close, intimate contact for transfer, it can be similar to that because it requires for you to be very close to that person. So there are no treatments for it, but the treatments, or specifically anyway, the treatments that we do have are those that are repurposed from smallpox. But the thing with monkeypox is it is very hard for it to be as severe. So it's not as severe as COVID is. It's mostly the rash and then like the flu-like symptoms. Where it would be severe is in our immunocompromised folks, which was why we were so concerned about the HIV community, because they are immunocompromised. So those are the people that we would think about it being bad in. At Loma Linda, we had one patient that was severely ill, and by the time we had acquired this medication, they were fine. Like the mpox had resolved itself, so we didn't even have to use it. That's how much of a lower grade than it is from COVID. So with the vaccination, you can receive the vaccine. It's a smallpox vaccine that's been repurposed for mpox. It's a 2-week window. So because the vaccine is limited in the amount that we have, when you have been around someone and they have told you that they have developed, mpox, you can go and then request the vaccination, but that's typically how the process will go. At this point, I'm not sure that there are mass mpox vaccination efforts, but if it's someone that is high risk, meaning someone that's maybe a part of the LGBTQIA+ community, or people that are working with mpox patients, then in that case, we'll recommend a vaccination, but it's really upon exposure. And it's a 2-dose vaccine, quite similar to the mRNA vaccine. And then with the prevention, once again, let's wash our hands. I guess I didn't realize how much we didn't wash our hands until COVID. So let's wash our hands, right? Skin-to-skin contact. If you see someone with an unexplained rash, do not rub up against them, okay? Stay away. If you are someone that has the unexplained rash, do not go around other folks. Wear a mask, and then wait until the bumps have crusted over. With the sheets, make sure they are washed in hot water. However, I would recommend just toss the sheets on out. Just get rid of them. Just buy new sheets. It's okay. And then, so for managing the monkeypox, let's think about it quite similar to chickenpox. So you can use supportive care. We can do ibuprofen. You can do Tylenol. We can use the calamine lotion and things like that. Because there's really no treatment for mpox other than when it's severe. It's very supportive. But like I said, when those lesions scab over, then the person is safe. And then finally, I want to close out with flu season. Because as I told you all, my mother just developed the flu. She just contracted the flu, just tested positive yesterday. And this is the worst flu season that we have seen in 10 years. So to put this into perspective, it has been 3 million infections for influenza. So in total, we had only 9 million infections for the entire flu season of last year. There were 3 million infections just in October for influenza this season. So let's think about how this happens. Well, because we had masking in place, right, with COVID, because we had social distancing, guess what the flu did? It said, okay, we're going to go change our clothes. And then when it came back with the punch. So black individuals are 50% less likely to be vaccinated and 50% more likely to be represented amongst hospitalizations and deaths for COVID-19. So when we're, for not COVID, that too, but 50% more likely to be represented amongst the deaths for influenza. So when we're thinking about the flu, let's think about the vaccines. We have a ton of vaccines out now, but also if you all are considering getting a flu vaccine, which I would heartily recommend, I would recommend to you the flu block vaccine. So it's called the recombinant vaccine, meaning that what it is it's, so there are eggs that are typically used to make the influenza vaccine. With the recombinant vaccine, they don't use eggs. So it's a very, very specific vaccine. So if you are someone that has not received it yet, when you ask them for it, say flu block. That is the vaccine. But I guarantee you this is the season to think about being vaccinated against it. But I will just introduce our team here once again. As you all see, I'm Dr. Jam. And then we have Sister Linnea King, Pastor Sam Casey, and then Mr. Robert Gordon. And we are excited to launch our Health Equity Collaborative.
Perfect. I'll skip that. So, y'all, please give another round of applause for Dr. Jam. She has been doing this work relentlessly, going on how long now? Officially? 2 full years, nonstop. If you have a church, she's there giving the same exact presentation. If you got a community event, she's out there giving the exact same presentation. She's providing vaccines. She's doing a little bit of everything. So again, thank you, Dr. Jam, for everything that you do for us. And looking forward to the work we're going to be doing in 2023. It's our Jordan year. So, Dr. Brooks, if you could please come up here. Dr. Brooks, today is their day of their Sabbath. He allowed us this space to give this presentation, for us to do this toy drive. He volunteered his space and his location so we can do this. So y'all give it up for him, please. And I want to allow space for you to say a couple of words, if you will.
Sure thing. We appreciate everyone coming out. Juniper Avenue members who are here, thank you for showing up. Today was actually designated as a day for community service. We were going to be giving up the space either way, in a manner of speaking. We're grateful that we were able to partner with all of you on this Sabbath, that we're able to serve the community in a way that matters. Because the most important thing as people of God, regardless of denomination, our responsibility is to love God and to love people. And as we are here today, take the information and use it wisely. That's crazy to hear 70% of our community is still unvaccinated. That's nuts. And that's something that we can readily do something about just by talking to our family members and encouraging them. It makes sense to do. Just if you don't care about nobody else, care about our people. Amen, somebody. And do our best to be able to get that number down. 70%, that's bananas, y'all. But with that said, I want to thank, I was going to say Pastor Jam. We thank the woman of God on today, amen. With that, with this presentation being completed, we want to invite everyone to participate in what's going on outside. Juniper Avenue members, if you can see where you can serve. We've got the blood drive. They're getting out toys and food and all manner of things in the back. But God bless you all. Enjoy this day and do good. For the Bible reminds us that it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Amen. Bless the Lord.
One more thing about the surveys. You want to say anything about surveys real quick?
If you all could complete the second survey, so the PERS survey, the doctoral students are collecting them. Thank you all so much for participating in that. Should you have any questions about the survey, it is listed here on this form. You can contact my research partner, Dr. Bridget Petit. Thank you.
Okay, all volunteers, if you can go